2019 was an intense year at the Health and Welfare Council of Long Island because while we address symptoms, poverty, hunger, economic stability, and more, our greatest role as the umbrella organization for the region is addressing systems. And so many of our systems, so many of our health and human services have faced continuous assault in the last year, a destabilizing force in the lives of Long Islanders that further exacerbates the vicious cycles of generational poverty, racial discrimination, and inequity. We know that as America's first suburb, we can lead the nation on what it means to solve complex social problems. And I mean that, solve them. Not touch them, not address them, solve them. But I know it might be hard to believe in solutions these days. As we sit here today, America is enduring an impeachment trial of the President of the United States. We fear war. We tune into the news and we see such rancor. We see psychological violence being committed by leaders who we are supposed to trust with the best interests of all people, but instead fail to know the meaning of by the people, for the people. Ask anyone and they will tell you we are divided as a nation. But what's more, we have turned away from the notion that we have a human responsibility to care for our neighbors, to see our humanness in them and theirs in us. Not unlike Hitler's Germany, language is being used in the media by people in positions of power and by so many who feel permission to turn their hate into action. Words like invaders, aliens, freeloaders, these words separate us and they're used deliberately to stir fear and anxiety. Yet those who are closest to problems are also closest to the solutions. And in the nonprofit sector, we are addressing an explosion of problems caused by the divisive, vitriolic rhetoric that is more than just racist, classist, and xenophobic. Quite frankly, it's anti-human. This vitriol causes families to live in fear, to drop off of safety net programs and retreat from community life. Yes, we are close to the problems as a sector, and yes, together as a sector charged with serving our communities, we can solve them. We have to solve them. Everywhere I go, in every meeting and event lately, I feel and I hear the extraordinary fear of those of you whose jobs involve caring for our communities every day. What if 2020 doesn't turn out well? What if we can't effectively mobilize? What if our mark in history is as vicious in 2020 as it has been of late? I'm here today because as we kick off a new year, I'm going to ask you to think differently, because we have to, and because we absolutely can. What if the collective power in this room, the collective power of the nonprofit sector working collaboratively with government, education, and other sectors changes that dynamic? What if we won? What if we were able to win the greatest lottery of all, a bright, powerful future for our region, reclaiming its spot in American history as the birthplace of post-war suburbia, only this time coming through for all who live here and for all who wish to live here and raise their families? I can tell you that lottery will not be won by luck. It will be won by harnessing the potential, the hope, and the profound commitment to change that I know can be stirred up in each one of us. I am asking you now, what if we had so much to look forward to that we once again awoke every morning awestruck by the opportunity to shape our future? To do so, we have to acknowledge the structural barriers that require change. This region, this post-war land of promise, was not built with promise for all. Restrictive racial covenants aimed to keep homes all white, as were recommended by the Federal Housing Administration to create homogeneous communities, was the birthplace of our region. Today, we face federal policies that use different, sometimes more subtle language, but also aim to discriminate. Robert Moses, for whom our beaches and our highways are named, bulldozed homes in communities in order to make room for urban renewal, and actively discriminated in his regional planning. That was 1947. Discrimination was codified, engendering the systemic racism that endures to this day despite increased diversity. This gravely ill system has not yet been openly, honestly, and adequately addressed. The Long Island we live in now guarantees that zip code largely determines health outcomes, educational opportunity, social mobility, and so much more. Yes, codified systems are powerful, but solutions come when we dare to believe beyond the system and beyond the barriers. Again, I ask you, what if the future held such promise that we could soon be celebrating the eradication of poverty, the eradication of community violence, the eradication of addiction? What if? In 1910, Theodore Roosevelt said, "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." As we enter a new decade, our responsibility to dream, to believe, and to dare greatly has never been so clear. All of us in this room bear a tremendous responsibility to rise above resistance and response. We too now must become the master builders, the architects of the future that we want for our neighbors and for our region. We can address the inequity that plagues our region like a cancer. We don't have to, nor can we accept the notion that any family's potential is targeted by hateful policies, by hateful rhetoric, by hateful systems. To do so, we must stand together, because together we are powerful. And quite frankly, when any child or any family's or any community's light is dimmed, the whole world is darker. And we can't stand for this. Not on Long Island, and not anywhere. If there's a child in Riverhead that can't access college, that matters to me, even if it's not my child. If there's a mom who's working 2 jobs and can't feed her children in Elmont, that matters to me, even if she's not my aunt or my friend. If there's a senior citizen in Farmingdale who can't pay for their prescription drugs and is foregoing food to do so, it doesn't have to be my parent for it to be my human responsibility to see it and change it. If there's a child whose potential anywhere isn't realized, then we are missing out on nurturing and honoring the promise of possibility, the promise for the next great leader, a leader our nation and our region needs now more than ever. As grateful as we are, and we are grateful for Newsday's coverage of the real estate industry and the unequal treatment afforded to homebuyers, we in this room, we all knew this. This wasn't a surprise. None of us are shocked by what was found. All we have to do is look around us and see the incredible fragmentation and segregation that has been a thief in our region, stealing hope and a bright tomorrow for Long Island's children. And when we speak of children, we have to remember that so many of Long Island's children are living invisibly. These children may be kids who are living in fear, with extraordinary trauma associated with their journey to enter the United States. Or they may be children struggling with mental illness, unable to access treatment. The adolescent suicide rate is the highest it's been in 20 years. And it's not just children who are being failed. A little over 3,500 Long Islanders are in New York State jails or prisons on any given day. Yes, this is what we face, but it doesn't have to be that way. What if the pipeline to prison didn't exist? If there was actually a mental health infrastructure in our region that captured and provided service for every child in crisis and addressed need, instead of the current dynamic in which our jails serve as housing for those who are suffering? What if we actually work together to tear down those walls, to disintegrate the notion that zip code is so powerful? We can do this. We have to do this. So what is happening now? We are in fact living in a time where there has been and continues to be what I call a crisis of consciousness. We are tired. We are tired of constant assaults. We are sad. Some days we are so sad. And in some ways we have all become complacent and apathetic. We hear about violence on the local news and shrug it off when it's in a Long Island community that experiences violence disproportionately. We forget our power to make change. For decades, we stood by while children in these communities battled addiction. Money wasn't available for those communities. It wasn't until the opioid epidemic came along and impacted people across racial and economic lines that we took notice and provided resources. It is a horror that we have school districts on Long Island that are failing children next door to districts that are exemplary. We haven't forgotten how to solve our problems, but we have sometimes stopped believing that we can. When the heat of the battle is continuous, our human response is to exhaust. But we have to rekindle our hope and our excitement for a brighter future. Winston Churchill once said, "The empires of the future are the empires of the mind." We can build that vision, that dream, but we have to stir up our minds, our hope, our energy, and our focus on who we want to become. I think we also have to have the courage to own that Long Island is fragmented. We have 2 counties, 13 towns, about 95 incorporated villages, 124 school districts, and I could go on and on. Imagine what it's like as a parent trying to access services. Where do you go? How do you even begin? I often wonder, as much as I love Long Island and I love Long Islanders, how many more generations of crisis are we going to continue to be complicit and observant? And when we say the system is broken and we don't act to change it, we are complicit. Someone could walk into a county agency for help with one thing and never find out about all the non-county services that could benefit them nearby. And despite the amazing work of our Health Equity Alliance, we have so much work ahead of us to eradicate this kind of experience for all of our neighbors. And let's be clear, this happens to people with resources and people without. Our fragmented system fails all families, but those in need disproportionately. But imagine a world where managed care organizations and health systems and criminal justice systems and education systems and nonprofit providers all shared information. A world where human service providers were not dictated to by managed care organizations, but actually had data, had power to be able to protect their clients. For one precious moment, allow yourself to imagine that universe. And what about the deep need that we are seeing in our communities? Poverty is a violent and traumatic experience. Waking up not knowing how you will put food on the table or where it will come from or whether the lights are going to stay on, that is brutal. More and more Long Islanders are struggling. Long Island no longer has pockets of poverty. We have pockets of wealth. The poverty rate on Long Island is the highest that it has been since 1959. It most certainly doesn't have to be this way. So look, we have to be real about who we are and why we as a nonprofit sector on Long Island have to do the work that we have to do. Those of you in government face a similar reality. Public service is a calling of the greatest kind. But it's become harder and harder with difficult budgets and growing need. But here's the thing. If we work together, we can absolutely change what we see. And again, this is what we have to do. Because our promise, our region's promise is bright, but can only be realized when we stop the madness, climb out of our personal pain, and remember our sacred and extraordinary power. We have to first see the bright future that we want to build. We have to own that, and we have to believe in it. We have to find a way to retreat from the constant flow of news designed to keep us afraid and tuned in. We have to stop feeling exhausted from fighting systems that are failing Long Islanders and decide together what that future should look like, what it can look like. We have to be willing to dream again. Yes, 2020 is a big year, nationally and locally for many reasons. But we don't have to enter 2020 scared and anxious. We can harness the collective power of this room, of our sector, and of cross-sector collaboration to be a beacon of hope, a shining example of what it means when a region reclaims itself, what it means to believe in a future much brighter than the one we are confronted with, and to work towards that with steadfast certainty of its actualization. Heck, I'm excited. I'm energized. I'm not interested in being part of the resistance, not when I look at this extraordinary room full of movers and shakers. I'm excited to walk into the promise of this new decade, to see our dreams as health and human service leaders realized for all of our communities. Imagine a universe in which parents of preschoolers in Hempstead could be as excited and hopeful for their children as their next-door neighbor Garden City school track children. We can get there. But we have to face the reality that is this complacent acceptance. We have to show up for one another, to be part of the new suburban experiment, authoring a new story that is the story of how America's first suburb woke up to its missed opportunity and redefined it, renegotiated it, and led the nation in what it means to truly raise all boats. Because the proverbial pie is big enough for all of us, and we all shine brighter when each of us thrives. 2020 is our shining moment in history to define who we are as a region, a state, and as a nation. Albert Einstein once said that we can't solve our problems with the same thinking that created them. We are here today to think differently. 2020 offers us a great opportunity to demand differently. And yes, as 501c3 organizations, we cannot take political stands, but we have a responsibility to educate our communities about policies that impact our future, policies that candidates are committed to, so that they can make informed decisions. If we believe that access to healthcare matters, then beyond providing access ourselves, we have to provide opportunity for people to participate in civic life and to understand how to self-advocate for policies that serve them. So join me in being a believer that we can do this. Each and every person on Long Island can be an agent of change. We want our communities to be informed so that they can walk into the light of what it means to access a future that is bright. In a time in which distrust in government is certainly the highest it's been in my lifetime, we need to make sure that our region votes, and not only in the big election that is looming, but in smaller elections too that have a huge impact on the day-to-day lives of Long Islanders. We have to reinvigorate the notion that your vote and your voice matters in a time when so many of our neighbors are feeling hopeless and are feeling without power. We have to show up at the polls. And the financial future, the sustainability of our region, the benefits available to our children from Head Start, to school lunch programs, to programming in our schools, to recovery dollars for the next Superstorm Sandy, they are all determined for the next decade now. Wow, talk about a mandate. The stakes are overwhelmingly high in 2020. Billions in federal dollars depend on an accurate census count. In addition to representation, census data is used to identify community needs, to determine funding for things like school lunch programs, highway programs, Medicaid, special education grants for our schools, children's health insurance, and so much more. A 0.6%, hear that again, 0.6% or greater undercount could also mean New York loses representation in DC. I mean, think about it. Can we afford to lose New York's voice, New York's children's voice in Washington, DC? Not today. And so to me, this is very scary. But I refuse to let that fear be crippling. It has to motivate us to act. And gosh, the current circumstances I have discussed make this a hard year for the census. The distrust in government, the anti-immigrant climate that is causing families who see children caged at the border to live caged with fear here on Long Island, these are major challenges to effectuating an accurate count. Fear changes behavior. Fear nurtures an undercount. An undercount nurtures our continued inequity. The inequity that I have been describing, where some communities get resources and other communities don't. Nearly 40% of Long Islanders struggle to meet a basic survival budget. And when people are afraid of deportation or are struggling to put food on the table, the census is just not relevant in their lives. We need to make it relevant. We need to change the expectation. Yes, fear nurtures an undercount, but participation nurtures equity. Participation nurtures hope. Participation nurtures resources and a bright future for all. So join me in changing that narrative. The 2020 census will set a funding precedent for 10 years about what we can get and expect as a region. If you had told me, seriously, if you had told me a few years ago that I would be passionate about the census or that it would be a major priority at the Health and Welfare Council of Long Island, I would not just not believe you. I would think you might have lost your mind. I would say, no way, that's not something I'm going to be, really engaged in. But as I became educated about what the census impacts, I quickly learned it's everything you, our network of nonprofits, work on every single day. It's food security, economic security, education, opportunity, everything that you stand for, and it's a 10-year impact. We simply cannot miss this most important opportunity to stand for the notion that Long Island won't be made afraid, that Long Island will come together, and that we will be unified in getting our fair share for every corner of our communities. And so when it comes to the census, we've been building an army on Long Island. It's an army weaponized with the transformative power of love. It's an army that stands for the principle that every person needs to be counted, not only because of the political impacts of an undercount, not only because of the funding impacts, not only because of the educational and economic impacts, but for a more simple reason. Humanity counts, and that means all of us. If we live in our separateness, if our counting of each other is determined by anything but our collective humanity, then none of us are free. Our region cannot thrive, and we will continue to see the region's promise as is constricted by our understanding. I ask you to leave here today with the recognition that our current circumstances do not mandate our future. I've been speaking about the census everywhere I can and inviting people to be census ambassadors, sharing the importance of participation with friends and neighbors. But today, I ask you, my colleagues in this room, to be census warriors. A warrior is defined as a brave or experienced soldier. And in this vast army that we've built, you all meet that definition. You stir up courage to confront life's most extraordinary atrocities as you serve Long Islanders every day without fail. And so your voices, your leadership, your power is needed in this moment to use that experience, to use that courage, and to help your community, your constituency, your family walk from that defensive space of resistance into the bright hope and opportunity of action, of being counted, and of getting Long Island exactly what it deserves, so we can take our what-ifs, our hopes, our vision, and turn it into actualized reality. In the early 1960s, JFK implored Congress that we had a choice to go to the moon, that we should choose it. Guess what? The technology to do what he wanted hadn't even been invented yet, but he dared to dream. He dared to believe. Imagine the audacity. The tools hadn't been invented, and his steadfast belief meant that we went to the moon and we saw our world from a new perspective. Join me in believing that we can transform consciousness even when barriers seem so difficult. Join me in believing that we can reach the moon and beyond when it comes to raising up our Long Island communities. Join me in believing and marching forward into a 2020, a new year, a new decade that is filled with promise for every Long Islander. If you feel the same urgency and passion that I do, join me in the knowledge that we can do this, because we have to do this, because this is our future to mold and our story to tell. And I can't imagine a greater moment in history, a greater region, or a greater set of leaders than those before me to be authors of this next chapter of Long Island's story, one whose chapter title will be Hope and Promise. Thank you.